Good morning to our brothers and sisters in Florida and in California and probably also in New York. And good evening to our brothers and sisters in Jakarta. And good afternoon to our brothers and sisters in Nairobi. So this time is for a kind of a recap from our activities since yesterday. We had a global opening when we had where we had 920 viewers from 19 different nationalities. And I would like to remind our listeners on YouTube that we have 3 hubs. We have the America hub, the Indonesian hub, and the Kenyan hub. And you can follow us at different times, either from Nairobi or from California or from Indonesia. So welcome to this 1.5 hour recap of what we have been able to discuss since yesterday. So I would like to invite General Bashir to open the session with a word of prayer.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. We are gathered here this afternoon and yesterday in the interest of promoting peace, reconciliation, and overcoming conflict in the world. In the Islamic tradition, it is said that whoever is involved in making peace between human beings, even if it is only 2 people, in Arabic it's called Islam, his reward is like praying 1,000 prayers. And so we pray to Allah to award us those degrees of ajr and blessings, and to enable us to continue to pursue peace for the betterment of the world. May Allah grant us the wisdom, the strength, and the fortitude to pursue this noble cause. May Allah open our eyes and those of all humanity to the importance of peace and the end of conflict. Even if it only means reducing conflict to a lesser extent than this day. We pray to you, O Allah, and may you grant us our prayer, for you have guaranteed us that any prayer we make to you shall be answered in the positive. Ameen.
Ameen. Ameen. Ameen.
Fatiha.
Ameen. Yeah. So once again, good morning and good evening and good afternoon. So we have about 1.5 hours of a recap. And if you allow me, I would first start with Africa, and then Indonesia, and then we end with California. So the team from Nairobi, and that is Africa's hub, because this morning we had also speakers from Nigeria. Okay, welcome.
That's okay. Can stop. Okay, thank you. Thank you, guys. Good afternoon, assalamu alaikum, and good morning, wherever we are today in the world. This morning, we started with discussing contemporary political trends in Africa. And in attendance, we had Dr. Mustafa Jenab Aidin, Dr. Elias Omondi Opongo, Imam Muhammad Ashafa, and Pastor James Wuyi. The discussion was very engaging. They were all very prepared, and they imparted a lot of knowledge and guidance in the pursuit of peace. All the speakers concluded by recognizing the need to address certain particular issues towards the achieving of that goal. They also agreed that it was not a job for the faint-hearted, and it's not an easy path to pursue, considering the sources of conflicts. We reviewed together the conflicts that are existing today in Mozambique, in Somalia, in Chad, the Central African Republic, the Tigray problem in Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, and generally the West African part of the continent in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and others. And therefore, the peace that has been elusive in these parts of the world, and these are just a few, to mention only a few in the continent of Africa, can be overcome through dialogue, through discussion, through a serious appraisal of each and every problem in its entirety. The speakers were unanimous in identifying the root causes of these conflicts in particular countries, where some varied from others, but in some cases, the problems were the same. For example, negative ethnicity, interreligious conflict, intra-ethnic differences, poor governance, resource conflict, and other territorial disputes were mentioned. In this regard, the discussants, the participants, and the panelists generally were of the view that Africa has a long way to go. And the best way to solve these issues is to pool resources together, to talk to each other, and to identify positive approaches towards resolving Africa's conflicts and differences. There is also the role of external actors, powerful states that dominate the continent's resource extraction and therefore contribute to poverty, contribute to poor health, contribute to lack of shelter, and generally the ingredients of an improved human security index. Most of the speakers spoke from personal experience. In particular, Reverend James Wuyi and Imam Muhammad Ashafa were very experienced speakers. They had participated in the 2008 conflict resolution effort following the post-election violence in Kenya. They have been involved in resolving disputes within their own country, Nigeria, both inter-ethnic and interreligious. They have been involved in Uganda, then in the north, some part of Uganda, where the Lord's Resistance Army is dominant, and in various other countries outside the continent. And they imparted an experience that I can say was very precious to all of us present. And their parting shot was that we should not be blinkered by all the problems that are existing today. We should look to the future, to a brighter future, and look at the positive side of all aspects of life. And in that way, we shall be able to gauge our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and therefore eradicate any threat that may be facing us in the future. And that may be present even now. So with those few observations, I would like to hand over to Dr. Reginald Nalugala to proceed with his part of the presentation. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, General Bashir. In the workshop 2, we were discussing building bridges for human solidarity in light of Pope Francis' encyclical letter, Fratelli, Tutti. In this discussion, we had Professor Hassan Boubakri from Tunisia, University of Sousse. He was looking at building human solidarity with refugees. And having also worked with Professor before, his greatest concern was the migrant from the Sahara, south of the Sahara, Horn of Africa, crossing over to Europe through Libya. But when they arrive in Libya, most of them are turned into slaves or sex pests. And he saw the suffering, especially during this COVID crisis, that most refugees and migrants will not be given the vaccine because they don't belong. So this point of not being part of the society was disturbing the religious and the Christian communities and Muslim communities of Libya. So they've come together and they're trying to do something. So what are they doing? They're trying to rally international support from UNHCR, Red Cross, Red Crescent, different groups that are there for humanity to give support to refugees and migrants. And of particular interest is young people who are crossing over from war-torn countries trying to reach Europe. So some of them, even though they're given permission to go to Europe, they enter a boat, it is perforated, and they drown in the sea. So what are they trying to say? That mosques and churches can be the vanguard for protecting refugees and vulnerable people. In Libya and Tunisia, they're able to open their centers for hot kitchens, shelter, and medical help, and even counseling, and even giving financial support to most of these vulnerable people to go back home where they came from. And of greater need are women and children. So his conclusion was, can we as faith partners build this international solidarity with migrants, irrespective where they come from, irrespective of their faith, that we can give them help and give them comfort in their homes. The second speaker was Dr. Emily Okuto from Nazarene University, Nairobi, and she was addressing vaccine nationalism. Of interest to her was the gap between the rich countries and the poor countries, especially in the area of vaccine sharing and distribution. Some countries have already bought enough vaccine to go beyond 2022, covering over 85% of their population. While in developing countries, especially in Africa, not even 1% of the population has received the vaccine. So how can the rich countries that have enough vaccine share with the poor countries in Africa and the rest of the world? Some countries have also locked the vaccine so that you cannot even buy now because the vaccines have been locked beyond 2022. So if you want to buy from these rich countries, you may have to negotiate, perhaps even at a higher price. So it reminded Emily Okuto of the biblical story of the rich man and the beggar, where the rich man eats and eats, but only crumbs fall to the beggar. She argued that it's not good that the international community should go that way. We should build a solidarity where we share things in common. Then she also touched on the geopolitical situation on drugs, where if China gives the drug, then the flags of China must be acknowledged. If it's America, then America flag should be acknowledged. It's Britain, British flag should be acknowledged. It says, no, why must that be the case? Because it promotes discrimination among nations. So the conclusion of the discussion was that we should build an international community that does not look at faith or color or creed or where you come from or what status of society you are. When there is a crisis, all of us should join hands and fight the same battle. Then she appealed to institutes of higher learning to collaborate with established universities in America, Europe, Asia, and wherever they are, that they can work together to develop vaccines for the local consumption. At this rate, perhaps we shall be able to reduce the pricing and the control of drugs so that everybody can enjoy in this important human solidarity that Pope Francis is talking about. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Dr. Reginald and General Bashir. Maybe you can have some few questions from the audience, and then if some issues of clarification, let us engage for the next 10 minutes before we go to Indonesia. You're welcome. Any comments? Yeah, welcome. Just whoever wants to speak can unmute. Okay, Father Abraham.
Thank you. How nice to meet again. And my point is from the perspective of COVID. Dr. Emily really brought very hot issues. The real problem now that we are facing is vaccine nationalism. And one of the solutions that she proposed is to push together towards having hubs for industries in the developing countries. Without that, as far as the centers are in the developed countries, it will always be a problem. She wants to indicate to the question which was asked to her, is there any light at the end of the tunnel? And one of her answers was indicating that if people, the world collaborates, it can cut the time that COVID can be with us. But if there is no collaboration, even if some countries may think they are managing the sickness or the pandemic, but they will not. So there is a need of collaborative action. And she brought also, COVID is also a threat to peace. And that we have actually practical example. In Ethiopia, the Tigray problem was started because of this. When the government, the national government postponed because of the election, because of the COVID, the regional government of Tigray said no. Then the conflict started. Now imagine, more than 20,000 people have died. More than 140 people are displaced inside and outside. This is really a threat to peace, not only in Ethiopia, Tigray, Eritrea, but will be in the world. So working for COVID is working for peace. My last observation from Dr. Emily was that the way forward is the way of solidarity. I think that's what we are doing, although in the air, but what we are doing on the air, I think tomorrow when we come back to our communities, we will act. We will have our little practical hubs, from the intellectual big disc hubs to the practical hubs to the communities. So I think there will be a difference in the world according to Pope's encyclical letter. Thank you.
Good. So this is what has transpired from the discussions of today, and I would like to share with the Americas Hub and the Indonesian Hub. So whoever would like, Ahmad, you want to, you can unmute yourself if you want to speak, Ahmad.
No, thank you.
Okay, good.
I do have a question. Many of my friends in North Africa are just getting their COVID vaccinations now. And I'm curious if what the main problem in getting the vaccine to people is. Is it a distribution problem? Is it a financial problem? Or is it a supply problem for the continent of Africa?
I think it's the three: supply, distribution, and financial. So in the distribution, it's always the problem of transport. And then in the supply is who is really supplying? Will it be Johnson from America, AstraZeneca from UK, or Sputnik from Russia, and whatever. So that's usually a big challenge. And many countries are not able to afford the vaccine anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe another thing I would like to add is that initially, if you recall, Africa was not severely affected, or it didn't have the sudden onset that was experienced in other parts of the world. So that gave us a false sense of security. And because of the prevailing weather conditions, it was generally assumed that the virus will not hit us as hard as it did other regions of the world. This has, to a certain extent, proven to be false, although the figures tend to show that infections are generally lower in Africa. But these figures could be deceptive because of lack of statistics and lack of access to facilities. Medical facilities are few and far between, and governments generally have taken too long to respond, and this has had an effect, a multiplying effect. And with the mutations that we have experienced, right now we are in the fourth wave, and there is not enough COVID vaccines available in the continent. South Africa was an exception. They had their own. They tried to apply it, but somehow things got out of hand, and I think they suffered the most. So Africa seems to be lagging behind for all the three reasons you mentioned, but beyond that, also there are other assumptions that made it worse for us. Although generally our figures appear to be low. But to me, I think they're deceptive figures. Thank you.
And whenever even if the vaccine is available in some regions, people are very reluctant to get vaccinated. That is another big issue, how to create awareness for the need of the vaccine. Yes, Marita?
Yes, thank you, Father Innocent. And thank you, General Basid and Dr. Reginald. I wanted to ask what role women have in the peace initiatives that you examined yesterday.
So I don't think that what was really part of the discussion, but the one who presented on the role on the vaccine, that was Dr. Emily Okuto, and that is our area in conflict resolution and in peace building, and she's involved actually at the level of African Union. So that's why we chose her, because of our expertise in conflict resolution and peace building. But I'm not sure if that aspect came out clearly on the role of women in peace building.
I think in my discussion, we did not break down between men and women or male and female, but obviously the major role that women play was kept in mind. And in reality, of course, women have contributed a lot. As we say, they are the mainstay of the family. There are some strange, if I may use the word strange, beliefs that the vaccine will somehow affect women negatively. So there has been a bit of a reluctance for women to get vaccinated, particularly young unmarried females. But I think now that the mutation has spread to even the younger generation, the teenagers, the reality is sinking in that it is necessary to get vaccinated, and mothers are at the forefront of this. On the ground, women are playing a very important role. They are taking up the vaccination debate and leading from the front, practically speaking.
Okay, good. So thank you very much, General Bashir. Any question from the panel before we go? Yes.
Bar.
Okay, good. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Father Innocent. Nice to meet you all. My name is Ambar. I'm from UIN Sunan Kalijaga, from Yogyakarta, and I was not really pay attention to the first presentation, but when we discuss about the vaccination, COVID vaccination and everything, and I remember that Indonesia has similar problem. Although our vaccination rates, I think it's bigger than in the Africa, but I was wondering if in the discussion in Africa Hub there is also mention or discussing about the roles of the religious leaders in promoting and encouraging people to get the vaccination or health protocol, for example, using masks and everything. Is there any discussions about this about this issue? That's my question, Father.
Actually, the religious leaders play a big role to the government. First of all, because churches and mosques and prayer places of worship, they were badly hit and affected when the mosques and the churches were closed. And then the government, at least in Kenya, had to create a task force of interreligious leaders. And that force is led by the Archbishop of Nyeri Archbishop Muheria, and that is the task force which advises the government even in reinforcing or even in trying to reduce the measures. So they really play a very, very big role. And actually, even religious leaders have promised that churches and mosques are not going to be places of contamination. And actually, our churches are third or most, full, because we have promised to keep all the social, all the measures, social distancing and so on. So the religious are really playing a very big role, because in Africa, religion is part of resilience. And if you put religion aside, then people are left somehow. And that's why the government have taken seriously the role of religious leaders. And actually, in the previous message of the president of Kenya, the last paragraph was, I ask interreligious leaders to help us creating awareness so that many people get vaccinated. And if religious leaders speak, and then people follow. Yes.
In addition to what Father Innocent mentioned, actually, Kenya has its part on this COVID for this year. There is a small group under Tangaza and Umma and Harmony Institute. It's called Interfaith Inter-Universities Africa Forum. We take every year the most urgent subject. For this year, actually, we have taken COVID-19, and we have run 5 webinars so far. And as soon as we finish this one, empowered by this conference, we are going to continue that. And we call the religious leaders from all over Africa, and we are trying our best also from that point of view. Thank you.
Yes, Gerald.
It's my understanding that COVAX is working internationally and has raised billions of dollars to distribute the vaccine. And I think UNICEF is working with COVAX. I haven't heard that mentioned at all. The role of the international organizations like the World Health Organization and the various groups that align with it, like UNICEF. Is that ever been brought up in your meeting? How, because they have quite a bit of money, which they had a recent meeting in Japan and they raised, I think, $6 billion for distribution of the vaccine. We're going to take that up in our workshop later this morning on the role of international organizations in making more equitable the distribution of the vaccine. But I haven't heard anybody mention COVAX or the World Health Organization.
Yes, in our second workshop, that was one of the presentations by Dr. Emily Okuto, that World Health Organization is working with COVAX to buy vaccines, and this vaccine should be distributed to developing countries. And I think they're going to acquire about 2 billion doses. But then the only difference is that the developed world is going to take 1 billion, that's 75 countries, and the rest of the world will have to share 1 billion doses. That's the only difference that we saw.
Yeah, I think the US is going to donate 500 million doses. At least our president said the US alone would donate 500 million doses.
Yes, and Kenya and the other countries have applied for support.
And actually, the US have already supplied to Kenya. And I think part of what we are using here now for vaccination is also a donation from the US. But the African Union under the Center for Disease Control is working very much with COVAX. And they have created a kind of solidarity mechanism where the African Union buys, secures vaccines from COVAX, and then African nations can buy now from the Center for Disease Control. So there is a certain mechanism about solidarity in supply of vaccines.
I think also there is a conversation going on to share some of the vaccines with the countries that have developed their own. Kenya was recently in conversation with the United Kingdom, for example, to provide vaccines. We have also approved the use of the Chinese vaccine. India is reviewing its policy on vaccine nationalism. And I think now the direction we are moving to is to collaborate in vaccine production, so as to shorten the availability time. Thank you.
We're going to hear from India in our workshop on what they're doing. And I know they've had their own vaccine production, so India and Africa might be able to collaborate on this.
Yes, yeah. So thank you very much. That was more or less the what came up in the discussion this morning. So we've seen that there was a kind of general analysis on the political situation in Africa with the first session, a kind of picture of the reality on the continent, and then also the second panel, which was also basically on migrants and COVID-19. So thank you very much for the Africa Hub, which was really Africa Hub because we had a speaker from Tunisia, and we had also speakers from Nigeria, and speakers from Nigeria. So thank you very much. Let us now go to Indonesia and see what was the outcome of the discussions today. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Father Innocent. I will be representing Indonesia and Asia Hub for to deliver and present our workshops. We call it workshops in our hubs. So if I may share my presentation, so that basically today we have two workshops. The first workshops is about the confronting intolerance, religious extremism, and violence. But before I continue with this workshop, I would like to tell the audience that in Indonesia or Asia Hub, the flow of the workshop run from the ideas about the first is about the confronting intolerance, religious extremism, and violence, and then we move to how we prevent this kind of intolerance and religious extremism and violence from the family. And we also we will close the workshop series by discussing about the future of human solidarity after pandemics. So that's the flow of our workshop series in Indonesia and or Asia's Hub. Can I share my presentation, please? Okay. Okay, so this is the first workshop today we have is confronting intolerance, religious extremism, and violence. The objective of the workshop is to understand various perspectives and approaches in confronting and or reducing intolerance, religious extremism, and religious-based violence. Our workshop today, we have 50 to 70% joined via Zoom. and more than 400% views the recorded workshop on YouTube. So we also stream our discussion live on YouTube this morning. Sorry, this afternoon. So we have two speakers. The first speaker is Datu Mussolini Sinafot Lindasan from the Philippines. He is the executive director of the Al-Kalam Institute of Islamic Studies. He's a native Bangsamoro from the Philippines, and which will influence his presentation this afternoon. The second speaker is Dr. Yunus Masruhin. He's from UIN Sunan Kalijaga, an alumni of Al-Azhar University, and which also affect and influence his presentation. In Asia Hub, we have two discussants whose role is to react and give response to the speaker's presentation. We have two discussion in each workshop. The first workshop we have Irina Gayatri, a PhD student at from Australia's University, and the second one is Sira Anggerini Buntara from Setara Institute. Some key points that I can share to you tonight is that the workshop has successfully invited and presented some best practices. So this will be key points in this, that the speakers presented best practices and lesson learned on how to confront intolerance, religious extremism, and violence based on their experience and knowledge. The first speaker, Dato' Mussolini, since he is a Bangsamoro in the Philippines, and he also we call it built with the Bangsamoro to be accepted in the Philippines. Bangsamoro is the Muslim community in the Philippines, and his presentation offered three important concepts based on his experience, that is fraternity, social friendship, and dialogue. This concept was, I will emphasize, is that this concept came from Lindasan experience in years and to bring the Bangsamoros to be accepted in the Philippines, and the lesson learned that we can learn from this experience is that the Bangsamoro was accepted in the majority community, Christian majority community in the Philippines, and then the majority also accepted the way of Bangsamoro live in the Philippines. The second speaker, Yunus Masruhin from UIN Sunan Kalijaga, presented the way Grand Imam Al-Azhar Ahmed Al-Tayyib developed a framework or theology of tolerance called the theology of citizenship based on Azharite concept. The difference between the first and the second speaker is that the second speakers see that the tolerance and the tolerance can come from the religious, from the elite, from the religious leaders. And since he is the important person at the Al-Azhar University, and also as a Grand Mufti at Egypt, so he can force his idea and actively work this concept. While in the first speakers, because he's from the grassroots, this will be some of the key point of second. Expect that the ways of confronting intolerance came from both grassroots communities, grassroots experience, and also from the elite perspective, that there is religious leaders. What is important also is that the discussions, the two discussions, Irina and Shira, enrich the discussion by connecting the two speakers using the Indonesian context. That is for example, the discussion, Irina said that while discrimination may be still can be good because silence discrimination can be good because it won't externalize as a violence or something, but it can be also, it should be work, because when you get discriminated, you have to know that you are discriminated. You can't accept this way. That's what one of the Irin said, and also Shira said that the experience of the dialogue cannot be done if you just if you still have the prejudice. She came with she presented with a experience about some persons in, I forgot in Europe, said that she receives many hate speech, many hate emails, and the way she cope with this kind of hate expression is that by inviting these people come into a cup of coffee and talk about something that may be trivial, but it in turns that this kind of work really works, and those who are hate her now is like her and love her. That's the how the role of the discussions in this workshop. And during the question and answer session, actually I can say that the first workshop is quite successful. The discussion lively and dynamic, and questions from the audience also enriches the whole of the workshop. The second, this is some of the presentation that show from the speakers. This is from Yunus, and I think this is quite an important quote from Linda Hassan that he mentions in his concluding remarks, that what but the expression of human plurality is then to choose to sit with others who are different from you and learning from them. I think this is a quite strong quote from Linda Hassan. Okay, the second workshop, as I mentioned, is about enhancing the role of family in instilling tolerance and peace. Tolerance and peace as the key point, as the key words here. The objective is also to emphasize the importance of enhancing the role of family in instilling tolerance and values. We also have 50 or 60 participants joined from Zoom, and 200 and 240 400 persons view the recorded workshop. Some key points here. While you can see here the speakers. The first speaker is Ratna Abdul Razak. She is from the Faculty of Human Ecology, UPM Malaysia. The second speaker is Ruby Khalifah from Asosiasi Masyarakat Aman, Asosiasi Masyarakat Adat Indonesia. The discussion is Ibu Satya from UIN Sunan Kalijaga, and Romo Paulus, Father Paulus from Duta Wacana Christian University. The moderator of this workshop was Father Joko Lolono from UGM. Okay, so the key points here is that what I want is that while these two speakers agree about how to instill peace and tolerance in family, the two speakers departed from different perspectives. The first one, Ratna Razak, is she presented her work using a building theory and framework, and that is one of her important is that the family is the source of peace and tolerance, and values and virtues are some of the keywords that she mentioned. While the second speaker, Ruby Khalifah, she stated that the peace can be started by women, using her experience and empirical experience on how she initiated Sekolah Perdamaian, School of Peace by Women. She presented her works, her presentation using some best practice and example and cases about women involved in radical and terrorism activism. The two discussions, as I mentioned, as the first workshop is also enriched the workshop. The discussion said, sorry, Father Paulus said that to instill peace and tolerance, you should not think only binary, using binary perspective. That he mentions about some examples in science faculties and study programs, for example, that there are only one or white and black. There's no gray. And he said this kind of way of thinking should be avoided, because there is always alternative on how to see how to work on peace and tolerance. And I think the important quote from the second workshop is that mentioned by Dr. Ratna Razak, that the peace starts from you, and that you are from a family. And this is kind of in line with the Fratelli Tutti documents, that strengthening family is very important to instill peace and tolerance. I will close my presentation by presenting this to screenshot from the speakers. This is from from Ratna Razak. Her conclusion, and this one is from Ruby Khalifa. I think that's all, Father Innocent, from Indonesia and Asia Hub. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. We can see already that is really Asian Hub. You had speakers from the Philippines.
Yes.
You had speakers from Malaysia.
Yeah.
And what also I appreciate, you have also made a link with Al-Azhar University, with the alumnus of Al-Azhar University, and even speaking from the point of view of Grand Imam Sheikh Al-Tayyib. That is very good. So we keep the connection with Fratelli Tutti and Al-Azhar University in the name of Grand Imam Al-Tayyib. The other point I see very strong from your point of view is you have more women speakers on your panel, and it's understandable that you are also taking from the perspective of a family, okay, and the role that the family plays, in education, So that is a very strong point. I think that we can also take. Peace starts from you, and you are from a family. So thank you very much and then we can see also the participation. 70 people on Zoom. That was quite good. Here we have reduced the number of people on Zoom, and also the number of viewers from 200 to 400. So thank you very much. So I also give opportunity to others to ask questions and make the comment. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I had a question.
Okay.
Confronting intolerance, religious extremism, and violence is a very interesting area of discussion. But I wonder whether you have common programs between Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus that are trying to address this, so that doesn't just look like a religious group is doing by themselves. Are you able to bring them together? Is there a project that is working together?
Yeah. Although I think from the workshop, we discussed a bit about this interreligious collaboration to confronting terrorism and violence. But I don't remember they discussed this more. But as far as I know, Indonesian government, one of the program from the Indonesian government to confront intolerance is, as I remember, is to yesterday mentioned by the Ibu Alisa Wahid and said about the moderation. Islam as moderation, particularly from the Islam perspective. But I think there's I think I have to find more data to support my my answers. But I remember the government really have strong program. The Indonesian government have strong program to confront this. Many national council and agency was developed and started was built to prevent intolerance, something like this. But I have to say that in our workshop today, we didn't really discuss about the role of the government and other, or in fact other the religions, such as Buddhism, because we only have two from the perspective of Islam and Christians.
Thank you.
Okay.
One question, kind of comment on that what she said.
Maybe we first go. Any other comments or question? Then I can ask Father Abraham to ask a question.
First of all, nice to see you so active. Ambra Sari Dewi. My question for you, Arhab, is that adding to the question of Dr. Reginald, how is the government involved into your religious collaboration? I was involved in a research. We say the religious leaders are very important, but that research showed without honest collaborating on this on equal footings, no much change can be done. Government, of course, collaborates to get more election during election, calls the religious leader, that's very usual. To check on the religious leaders, whether they are kind of to dominate and to keep in check, they do. But if there, in your region, the government honestly understands the need for collaboration for the better results in the society. Thank you.
Okay. But in our this is as I mentioned, the role of the government. We are not really discuss about this in our workshop. But as far as I know, that the Indonesian government have the program. I remember the Jokowi's government performs. I don't know how to spell it in English, but there's Badan Nasional Penanggulangan Terorisme, ya, Mas Koid ya. National Council on Preventing Terrorism. They work. This government, this council work in every layers of the society, from the elites and into the grassroots. women and 2 children and also men, male and female, at school and also at the prisons, and also involve all of the religions in Indonesia. So, but I have to admit that because I'm not really follow this issue myself, so I'm not really updated with their program. But as a big program from the Indonesian government, from the Jokowi's government, this I think this council, councils of national councils to preventing terrorism, it shows shows how Indonesian government act and strong as a strong to prevent terrorism and intolerance. Many of them, although we have to admit also, I have to admit also that terrorism actions in Indonesia kind of really increase in this, like 5 years, 10 to 5 years in this. But I think that that's also because the Indonesian government shows their support to prevent terrorism. So it's getting lower. That's from my perspective, of my own perspective, not from the workshop, because in the workshop we don't really discuss about this the role of government, because we discuss about the speakers and the audience discuss about their perspectives and their as I mentioned, the best practices on how the Bangsamoro in the Philippines try to be active in the Philippines as a minority community, Muslim minority community in the Philippines, and they struggle to be accepted in the Christian majority countries in the Philippines. And the works of these years resulted good, and Dr. Lindasan mentions about this one, and I think that's they really discuss about.
So thank you very much. What we hear from there that you have the National Council for Preventing
Yes.
Terrorism, which is already
Yes.
A government arm. Okay, Gerald.
My question is, I haven't heard anybody bring up on education of the madrasa as a way to implement tolerance and the views that we've been speaking of from the Grand Imam. Is there any effort to work with madrasas in these countries where it seems to me intolerance must come from must be confronted in the educational level? I don't know if that's being done in any way in Indonesia or the Philippines, but it seems that's another critical component, because the intolerance is taught somewhere. That's where someone picks that up in the view of how they understand the Quran and the Sharia and so on. We know that is part of the problem as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good questions and interesting, because the discussion, Lindasan mentions about the educations of in the Bangsamoro and on how they confront intolerance, and both in a formal and informal education institution. And that's why the third concept of he offers the dialogue is really mentions about how the confronting intolerance can be happen using in this concept of dialogue in both in the classroom and also outside the classroom. That's from the evidence from the Philippines. One of our discussions, Father Paulus said that, as you mentioned, the intolerance kind of increase in the science science study program and faculties in Indonesia, because he said that this happened because the ways of scientists in Indonesia thinking is that there's only one truth. And he said that this is really kind of dangerous, because if you only accept one truth, then you can accept that, for example, one truth and one faith. That your faith and your religion is the only one that the correct and then true. Then you can accept other religions, you can accept other perspectives that different from you. That's why if you want to, he said that if you to confront intolerance, you have to ready to. He said, I quoted from him. You have to ready to do the abstraction. I think that's the correct way to spell the abstraction, and also just to broaden your mind, that there is always an alternative, there is always other perspective, there is always other truth out there beside yours. So you have to be ready to accept it, and the way to do so is by education.
Okay, fine. Thank you. I think those are there are questions, but at the same time, some path to follow to see what is the role of the government, for instance. Yeah, because government, they make policies and so on. But there is also the avenue of education, what is being taught in the madrasa. Okay, because that's where you can also groom the young generation towards tolerance and so on. Of course, your focus on the family is genial, because education starts also from the family. And what I also appreciate is that you bridge both the elite and the grassroots. So it is very, very important, bringing the elite and the grassroots together. And also the way you have chosen speakers and discussant. And I think that also enriched your, in my opinion, your discussions and so on. So thank you very much. Let us now go to California, which is now morning of the second day. Yeah, okay, welcome.
Rita, do you want to pick it up? Your audio?
Marita, we are not getting you, not yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thomas James summarized the first component of the, actually the first 3 or 4 components of our program yesterday. And I am summarizing the last workshop on racism. So I'll follow Tom James.
Okay, thank you, Marita.
Tom James, welcome.
And thank you, and good day, everybody. Father Ryan was the first speaker, and there's one thing that he said that really struck me, was that he's never encountered any demonization by Muslims, nor any what he described as Christophobia by Muslims. Here in the United States, Islamophobia is a big problem in many regions. And Father Ryan addressed, in a general way, a lot of what Americans experience. He gave some really helpful suggestions as to how to counter that. And I think those are basically based on the social political charity that Pope Francis spoke about in Fratelli, Tutti, about reaching out, about dialogue, social services with one another. One of the things that most Americans don't understand is how Islam is a way of life. Here in the United States, we often compartmentalize religion. In Islamic countries, that's not quite the case. Americans have difficulty kind of understanding that. Hans Kung, in his Paradigm for Peace, said that we won't achieve world peace until there's dialogue between religions and also within the religions. And I know Father Ryan basically touched on those topics in his talk. And my own personal experience, I know a number of Moroccans who are Muslim, who are teachers that I'm in contact with constantly. And I'm amazed at the respect they have for my religion as a Christian and as a Catholic. Touching on what Amber said about the Philippines, I travel there a lot, as I do a lot of different places in the world, but I'm amazed at the tolerance that the Filipinos have for Muslims, especially in a predominantly Christian country. I wouldn't see that here in the United States. Governor Jerry Brown, who's the governor of California, spoke on the climate crisis. And of course, there are wildfires going on out in the west coast of the United States, from north to south. And I believe one statement that was made, I'm not sure if it was by Governor Brown, but the disconnect between, at least in the Catholic Church, between the climate and ecology versus social justice, and how those two have to come together to solve this problem. And one of the things that I think can bring people together worldwide is this climate crisis, that we've got a common problem that we can share together. And if we have this dialogue in between religions, that'll make that happen. And any questions?
Tom, do you want to comment on the presentation by Father Michael Agliardo?
Okay, and I know he did speak of the Philippines, and I wasn't able to hear all of his presentation. I regret to say we had a crisis here at our school regarding COVID, so I only heard bits and pieces of his presentation, regretfully.
Well, I can comment on that. Father Agliardo compared the response of Laudato Si in the Philippines, Poland, and the US. And he pointed out how different these three responses are. In the Philippines, which is a largely Catholic country, the bishops there have embraced Laudato Si and have promoted it so that the environmental movement is very strong in the Philippines. Whereas in Poland, which relies a lot on coal for its energy, and it's also a country which is caught between Germany and Russia. It's a small country. It becomes a part of its identity to have an independent source of energy. So the reception of Laudato Si has not been as strong as it has been in the Philippines. And then, of course, in the United States, he brought out how the environmental movement, which started really in the 1970s with Rachel Carson, has the environmental movement has really grown together with the religious community. So the two have blended together, led by Thomas Berry, a famous Catholic theologian, who, for example, the Sierra Club published some of his books, which is an environmental organization. So we can see how religion and science and religion and various social movements can be important part of building fraternity and building understanding of these key issues that we're facing, such as the environmental crisis. So in the US Hub this afternoon, we're going to have another whole presentation on the environmental movement. So I just wanted to add that Father Agliardo, who was our third speaker, gave an important comparative study of these three different parts of the world and how they So I think that's another question of how Fratelli Tutti will be received, maybe different in different parts of the world, based upon the context that is going on in these countries.
I have sent copies of Fratelli Tutti to my friends in Morocco, some of whom have read it and have actually commented on it, and were actually quite amazed. As they study things from the West, a lot of them study Western philosophy. So when they see religion, which they haven't been exposed to, they're actually quite amazed and really impressed with Pope Francis's encyclical and the words he had to say, especially in the dialogue with Muslims.
Following our conference on Monday, we are having our own seminar on Fratelli Tutti for all of our doctoral students in GMU, which will be on Monday evening US time. So we're hoping to continue the dialogue and the study of Fratelli Tutti in GMU and make it part of the educational program that we're offering to our students. And I hope that this would be another aspect of how we can, in the way forward, how we can use this document as a teaching document in various institutions, and that way spread its message beyond just this one conference, becomes part of the curriculum in various institutions around the world. I think that's very important because we can reach a lot bigger audience that way.
Well, maybe I'll go ahead now with the fourth program we had yesterday, which was a 2-hour workshop moderated by Susan Gunn, who is the executive director of the Maryknoll Office of Global Concerns. And I'm going to ask Uday, if he is there, taking a cue from Ambar to use visuals, to ask if Uday would put up the image of our workshop on addressing racism. This was one workshop which focused specifically on the United States. We are the hub of the Americas, and the environmental program that we're going to have today will focus on South America and will also include other parts of the world. But this workshop in particular focused on addressing structures of racism and building solidarity in the United States. So you see on the left our moderator, who did an excellent job, and the 4 speakers. And I'll summarize briefly the content of the 4 speakers. Ellen Molly described 2 events that address racism. The first was a program in the city of Minneapolis, which started as a prayer tent after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It was started by 2 African-American community leaders. It was a prayer tent on the site of George Floyd's death and was an interfaith space for prayer. For 30 days, people came and prayed. And then due to COVID, they decided to launch this virtual prayer tent, which was very successful, with 350 to 500 people from all over the world meeting every morning at 8 a.m. Central Daylight Time for reflections from different religious leaders, and then followed by a period of silence of 9 minutes and 29 seconds of silent prayer, which was the time, of course, that the police officer tragically had his knee on the neck of George Floyd. So this was a very powerful interfaith event that went virtual. The second event is not a series of events that Ellen Molly described, is her leadership in an interfaith group in Fargo, North Dakota, which supports the indigenous people there. And the recent news of many graves of children being discovered on sites, on religious sites, has opened the wounds of the indigenous people in her area, and really been a source of great pain. And so the interfaith community has come together to listen to them, to sit with them, to encourage them to express their rituals. And most recently, 9 bodies of the children from Carlisle, Pennsylvania. These are indigenous children who died in these institutions where they were forced to leave behind their cultural dress, their language, as well as their families. And the bodies of these 9 children were brought ceremoniously very recently from Pennsylvania to Fargo, North Dakota, where they were placed in the indigenous burial grounds and brought home, so to speak, with important rituals. Secondly, Simone Jude creates video documentaries for Black Voters Matter. So this is a movement that has gained a lot of ground here in the United States, and particularly in areas where there's discrimination against voting. And Simone showed clips and did commentaries on the videos that she took, video clips that have been shown on 5 different news channels, demonstrating the discrimination against voters, particularly in the South. And Sam Ho, who you see there as a panelist, is one of the officials in the community college system in our area. And he presented the areas of diversity and combating systematic structural racism, the process of that they have had in their school system to support diversity of faculty and students, and to ensure that students of color are able to graduate. He said that had included 5 different processes. First of all, beginning with their mission statement and the leadership of the college. And they formulated that mission statement studying the laws and policies of the federal government and the state to make sure that everything was incorporated into the procedures of the community college. They have measured those standards, measured the diversity of their students and of their faculty. They have created different initiatives whereby they celebrate over 25 different holidays of different diverse religious and community organizations. He invited 2 other colleagues to present with him. One was Sammy Ibrahim, excuse me. Sammy is a professor of chemistry, which he describes as a universal language. And he founded the Middle Eastern Heritage Celebration 20 years ago, which is a week which celebrates the traditional art, music, dances, and poetry of the Middle Eastern culture. And together with Jerry Gritson, they co-organized and co-led a trip to Egypt in 2010 for 40 faculty and students. And this group was the largest American academic delegation to visit Al-Azhar University, which is the global center of Sunni scholarship. Their delegation, which was co-sponsored by the US State Department, had a formal academic seminar over 2 days with faculty and students from Al-Azhar and on the monolithic religions. Jerry Grutson discussed a program which he identified at the United Nations called Solia Connect, which allows community college students to connect with students in Egypt and other parts of the Middle East. As part of this program, an American soldier who had fought in Iraq met an Iraqi member of the Solia Connect, and they formed a group to partner together and to present to Professor Grutson's class. And this, he said, was the most remarkable experience he had with Solia Connect, to have a soldier who had been brought in to fight the Iraqi people, years later connecting with someone in that country, forming a bond, and then presenting to the class together. The final speaker that you see here is Nate Tyner Williams. Nate is the founder and publisher of the Black Catholic Messenger, which produces media by and for African American Catholics and serves as an outlet of both the Black press and the Catholic press. Nate is a descendant of slaves who has lived all of his life embedded in systematic racism, which he defines as when a racist attitude is upheld by the government, school, or other institutions. Raised Protestant, Nate is an adult convert to Catholicism who is now studying for the Roman Catholic priesthood. He described the history of Black Catholics who share a history of unshakable faith and strong commitment, despite being excluded from leadership in the Catholic Church for many decades. So that gives you a sense of the presentations that were made initially by each of the presenters. And I just want to say that Susan asked each speaker in closing to respond to the question, what's next? Ellen Molly said, diminishment of colonialism, which still hasn't been addressed. Simone stated, action needs to be taken at every level. Grassroots organizations such as Black Voters Matter need to be funded. Rights of incarcerated people to vote must be restored. We all need to educate the people around us. We must stand in solidarity. Most important of all, storytelling. We must share our stories. Sam Ho said the issue of excessive student debt is felt more intently among people of color. Students shouldn't have to leave undergraduate education with $100,000 in debt. Susan then asked the panelists, what gives you hope? Professor Grutson, the success of this conference. Simone, the power of storytelling, community, and human connection. Ellen, all the people of different races and spiritualities worldwide who are working to combat racism and protect human rights. And Sam Ho finished with a quote of the American anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, a small group of dedicated people can change the world. We see that this is the only thing that ever has. And so I'll close there.
So thank you very much for this vast experience and very contextualized from the perspective of the United States, but still within the Fratelli Tutti bridging the bridges and then calling for solidarity. So this is the round, let's say, table of the what has happened for the first day. I'll give maybe 5 to 10 minutes for questions, and then we see the way forward. I'm told 5 minutes by our technician. Yes, yeah. Yes, Ahmad.
Thank you, Father Innocent. I was quite amazed by the Hope of America, who raised the theme of the racism in their workshop. I just wonder about what is the current condition in the United States. Does racism is really still happen? I don't know what is the condition is in there, but does racism is really still happen? And if you mentioned about the addressing structures of racism, I just need to clarify that. Is there really a structure of the racism? What kind of racism that occur most in the United States? I mean, what kind of racism that occur most in the United States? Is that a religion racism, or is that I'm sorry, a black and white racism or other racism? Because you mentioned about the structure of racism. Maybe any of from the Hope of America can explain about this. Thank you.
Jerry, go ahead first, and I'll follow.
The history of the United States, one of the key areas of racism has been voter repression of Black people, making it difficult for Black people to vote. And this has continued even into our own time. There have been new laws passed, for example, in Georgia, making it more difficult for Black people because the Black people usually are concentrated in urban areas. And so the rural areas tend to be more white. We have what's called, certain patterns of voter repression. And this is new laws have just been passed in these states to make it more difficult for Black people to vote or purging Black voters from the rolls. In other words, if you don't vote every time, they can take you off the roll. And so like in Georgia, almost 100,000 people have been taken off the rolls that are Black. So there's been an attempt to fight against this, and there are various efforts to try to pass legislation to ensure people the right to vote. So that's one way it has been most graphically present in voting.
Okay, thank you. Tom James.
Yes, the presentation yesterday, I believe Susan Gunn had really kind of brought that point of the systemic racism. Where I live in Florida, I live in one of the more conservative areas, probably historically the most racist areas. And the racism isn't overt, but it's very insidious. And as Dr. Grudson had mentioned about the voter suppression laws, there's a lot of things affecting employment that are discriminatory, especially against Blacks, lesser degree to Asians, but more so to Blacks.
And also, studies have analyzed the financial differences between in different populations. And there's a dramatic difference between the economic value of an African-American family which has almost no savings due to the discrimination that's been practiced and the redlining that doesn't allow them to buy a home in different areas, and the average American citizen. So there are many forms, and while there are many laws in place, as Tom James pointed out, this white supremacy is internalized so that it's very operative in employment and many other aspects of everyday life.
Yes, Tom James.
One of the other things it has to do with education. And here in the United States, schools are often funded by property taxes. And of course, Black areas and minority areas have much lower property values, hence less property taxes to fund education. So built into the whole system is basically a deficit in education resources for minorities, and that's a problem.
Thank you, Gerald.
For example, I grew up in Detroit. The inner city, this is another phenomenon, the inner cities of the United States often are heavily concentrated with minorities. And so the property values are lower. Therefore, there's much less money to collect for services like education, police, and so on. So the level of quality of life is much lower in the inner cities than in the suburbs. The suburbs have higher property values. And so there's a disparate situation between the inner city and the suburbs. And this is particularly true in the big urban metropolitan areas like Detroit or Philadelphia. So this is another problem that we're trying to work on in the United States, is to have more solidarity between the urban areas and the suburban, which tend to be more affluent, and the inner cities are poor.
So it's our hope that the discussion created from the Americas Hub will create an awareness on the magnitude and the consequences of racial, injustices in the U.S. As we talked about the issue of migration in Africa, and even the issue of lack of solidarity with vaccine production and the distribution and so on. These are issues, these are current issues, and we are reflecting on them in the light of Fratelli Tutti. And even the issue of tolerance as discussed by, and intolerance by the hub of Indonesia, and the role of the family and the role of education. It has also come very strongly in the US, the role of education. So these are some of the themes that we hope will create awareness around the theme of bridging, building bridges and human solidarity in the line of Fratelli Tutti. I think we have gone around, we have summarized somehow what these 2 days, 1 day and a half have been. And to our listeners on YouTube, we continue with our session. It is morning in the US, so you can follow the discussions on the YouTube as they continue with their second day, and we'll be closing tomorrow, 21st, in the afternoon with the presence and messages from religious leaders across the religious divide in the world. So thank you very much for the effort that everyone has put into this conference, and the response has been really, really, really impressive. From the opening session, more than 900 viewers. In Indonesia, we saw each session between 200 and 400. We've not yet seen how many people have been following for the America Hub, but we couldn't do that. That is again even the benefit of COVID. We could not have 100 people gathered together in one for a conference. But let us also celebrate the opportunities that COVID-19 has given us, being creative and inventive and move forward. So if you allow me, I think we would close the session today. But before we close the session, I'd like to request if you can send to Nairobi some of those summaries, even your PowerPoint. We can see how we can start drafting a kind of a common message that we can share before we present it to the public as a statement from and outcomes of this conference and the way forward. So I would appreciate very much if you send what you have already, the summaries to Nairobi. I see already Dr. Reginald is taking some notes, and we'll try our best to summarize and bring out some key messages. We would like really to thank also the generosity of our viewers online. The pandemic has obliged to go this way, but your presence online shows the interest that you have in this conference on Fratelli Tutti across the globe. May you be blessed. So we can conclude with a word of prayer from Ahmad. Please, Ahmad. Yeah.
With my religion is okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbana zalamna anfusana wa illam taghfir lana wa tarhamna lanakunanna minal khasirin. Rabbana hab lana min azwajina wa dhurriyyatina qurrata a'yun waj'alna lil muttaqina imama. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adzabannar. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. So thank you very much, and we meet again tomorrow, and have a blessed session, brothers and sisters.